Hello, and welcome to the Culture Roundtable, brought to you by Culture and Sports, where culture is critical to long-term success. For the past 2 years, Culture and Sports has been educating and influencing organizations, teams, coaches, staff, and even athletes about the importance of culture and leadership in sports, as it greatly impacts organizational success, team and athlete performance, and the short and long-term mental, physical, and emotional health of athletes. Leadership and organizational culture adversely or positively have a cost and impact to every organization's bottom line, not only with fans in the stands, concession sales, and merchandise sales, but broadcasting, advertising, and endorsement deals. We believe in our mantra, culture is critical for long-term success, and strive to promote this every day. Positively influencing others and educating sports organizations, front office and support staff, coaches, and athletes on the impact of leadership and culture is what we work on daily. I'm your host, Riley Rodriguez, and I'm a student athlete currently attending the University of Southern California, majoring in journalism with a minor in sports media. I currently play for the USC Women's Club basketball team, and I would now like to introduce our Culture Roundtable. The purpose of this webinar is to discuss the immense impact and importance of women and girls in sports. And now I would like to introduce to you the special group of panelists. First, Manisha Aggarwal. Manisha has her undergraduate degree in psychology and MSc in sports psychology. She is currently undergoing her professional doctorate in sport and exercise psychology, with her focus in looking at equality, diversity, and inclusion within sports and creating an inclusive culture. With a background in dance, Manisha sits on the Youth Advisory Board for Arts Council England and is the host of Culture and Sports Athletic Approach. Next, Maria Fautali. Maria is a professional football player whose position is running back for the Pittsburgh Passion. She's a college athletics strength and conditioning coach, entrepreneur, and model. Next, Lori Akimura. Lori is the vice president for World Paravolley, and throughout her career, she has worked in almost every role imaginable in the U.S. and international levels. Working at the club level to serve as chair of the board of directors at USA Volleyball, technical delegate at the 2020 Olympics, to her recent appointment as sports director of World Paravolley, the first female to serve in that role in the history of the International Federation of Sitting Volleyball and Beach Paravolley. Next, Hannah McEwen. Hannah is a running back for the Texas Elite Spartans of the WNFC, Women's National Football Conference. She moved to Texas last year to advance her football career and played in Finland representing Canada at the IFAF Women's World Championship in 2022. She is working at Sports Academy at the Star as a recovery tech. Christian Banowski. Christian current team Canada bobsleigh athlete and 2022 Olympian. She is a Canadian record holder and a 3-time World Championship medalist. She has a mechanical engineering degree, kinesiology degree, and a passion for sport, performance, and mental health. She is also a guest co-host of season 2 of Culture and Sports Athletic Approach. Next, Zamaya Walton. Zamaya is a current junior at Butler College Prep, and she's the first high school student in Illinois history to sign an NIL deal. She has several Division I scholarship offers, is number 54 on the ESPN 2024 class list, and is a volunteer within her community. She aspires to study business and sports journalism in college. And now I would like to call on Hannah to go first and share her perspective on how women are getting more recognition in sports media, and how women and girls are getting more airtime on ESPN, online, and news networks. Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me. So women in sports are definitely getting more airtime and coverage, but I think what is equally as important is having more opportunity in broadcasting for women at a higher level. Women tend to just be interviewers, which still is a really important job, but it kind of limits us. So, because you still have that narrative that like women can't talk sports. So to have that representation really changes the narrative for us. And I think over the years it really has evolved. But when you have seats at the table, when it's not just an all male panel, it definitely closes that gap between women and men's sports.
No, absolutely. Absolutely agree. Maria, would you like to talk about your own perspective?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. So for me, I think that it's like Hannah said, a lot of it is about the narrative. So we're getting a lot more media presence, but the narrative around it, I think, can be a lot better. So for example, when ESPN and things like that talk about male athletes, they talk about LeBron James, his stats, how he is a leader, how he played in this specific game. But when it comes to women, it seems like the narrative is always, oh, she's such an inspiration to young girls, which is good. And that's like one of the highest honors for us. But I think that we deserve to be talked about also as the competitors that we are. So I think that if we kind of shift the narrative and talk about that, like our stats and how we've grown from our first year to our second year and things like that, maybe we'll get a little bit more respect in the media as well as actual athletes and performers.
No, I absolutely agree. I've never really looked at it from that perspective, but like now that you say that women are seen as like, oh, so inspirational and she did this and that, and men are usually seen as like, oh, look at these stats, look at he did this record, he's the first player to do this, and women aren't really necessarily recognized for that. Like I know that Cristiano Ronaldo was had like the most goals in for like men's soccer, but like two women before him had scored multiple like way more goals than he did, and they didn't get the recognition that they had deserved for that. And so like I totally agree with what you said. But does anybody else have any comments on this topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on kind of the impact of having that representation within sort of the news and the media. And kind of going back to this sort of inspiration, it does kind of allow girls watching to be like, okay, I can do this, but it's not always necessarily just being a player or an athlete, but it's also being a broadcaster or whatever else. And I think it's so important to have those role models because you don't know what home is like. You don't know if parents are encouraging that or if they're not encouraging it or if they're coming from traditional backgrounds. And I think having that representation within the media can really help to encourage that, and then they can almost get mentors that way as well, or they know who to kind of reach out to. And I think that kind of impact is important to sort of highlight off the back of that.
No, absolutely agree.
If I could, I think Manisha just touched on a really important thing. I mean, this is a culture discussion, right? And this question is so perfect because the whole culture behind how we consume women's sports, right? How we view it, where we can find it. I mean, that's really, that's really part of almost every area of this subject that we're going to cover today, right? So it's, being less aspirational and more, women can have stats that are crazy great, right? When whatever sport that we're doing, women can compete. They can get sweaty, they can cheer, they can celebrate in those moments, and they can, be disappointed if the outcome isn't what they hoped it was, right? We can be just as great winners as we can be great losers, right? We're capable of having every part of that spectrum. That what traditionally people think of, oh, sports coverage, it's always been men's sports in particular, right? But now we're seeing, and it is a culture shift, right? It is a generational shift. I'm a lot older than all of you all on this panel, so I've sort of seen, where before it's like we really struggled just to get tiny, tiny moments of women's sports on TV, and now, not that we're all the way there, but now at least we can consume some of this content, and in real time, right? Women's sports used to be like at 12 midnight or, at some really inconvenient hour of the day, but technology has helped that, right? It's a shift toward being able to consume the type of content that we want. And surprise, a lot of people are asking and searching for content about women's sports. Right. So that's actually, a positive shift, right, in the culture.
I totally agree. Because before women's sports was just shown, I'd say like small highlights on ESPN or things like that. It was never full games, but I think now more channels are reaching out and putting actual full games, basketball, soccer, volleyball on actual TV stations. When before it was pretty much highlights or having to have like Hulu or some other site to watch. Now I think it's on more normal TV channels, which is reaching more people to show that women's sports isn't just, a basket or a goal or simple things like that, but that our full games are being televised and things like that.
No, absolutely. And there are definitely more female broadcasters going out there as well, which personally I'm very, very excited about. I'm very excited to see more women in that field specifically, because that is definitely something that I would like to do in my future. And yeah, I'm very excited to see more women in broadcasting. But does anybody else have any comments on this topic? I'll go ahead and move to the second. I'll go ahead and move to the next. So I would like to call on Lori specifically to talk about equal pay in professional sports and how leagues like the WNBA and professional football and soccer contrast to what happened with the U.S. Women's national soccer team, and how recently women's soccer drew the highest crowd ever for any men or women's European Championship in 2022. And the question that I am going to ask is, why are NGBs and professional leagues still not paying what women deserve? And has there been any recent positive change?
Well, that's a really loaded question and a good one to discuss. So first of all, I think you have to think of, when you talk about equal pay, or you have to break it down into both on the field of play itself, right, and the athletes who deserve, to achieve the same level of compensation, right, whether they're male or female. And then you also have to think about really the decision making that's going on behind the scenes and equal pay for those that are working behind the scenes, right? So I always like to talk about it in terms of, to understand why this is important, right? I worked in the sporting goods industry for a number of years, and it would always surprise me, right? As somebody who played sports, and my parents were involved, and my sister played sports as well. It's like, you have to think about, women have always influenced, right, the consumption of sports products, right? Think about it, right? And that's something I learned very early on in the sporting goods industry, is that the influence of the female consumer has always been quite high, right? Whether it's we're choosing the uniforms, or going and trying to find the basketball shoes, the volleyball shoes, the soccer cleats, and things like that. But when you talk about why is that important, right? Because it's fair to say now, we just talked about consuming women's sports content, right? It's fair to say now that not only are women driving the consumer side of it, but also now you're seeing female athletes being highlighted for more than just the 30-second clip, right? As Zamia just referred to, it's no longer about a highlight reel, right? It's about the actual entertainment value, if you will, enjoyment value, aspirational, in that if you enjoy playing a sport or watching it, you're going to want to consume more, right? You're going to want to see it more. In terms of, I think, and what I've noticed, in my own experiences, is that you have to first value what you're worth, right? No matter what part of that organizational chart you fall on. Are you in the front office? Are you, I always call it, the athletes are the asset, right? That is the thing that we want to protect and the thing that we want to showcase. But it's not always possible, these decisions that are made as to which matches are covered or what stadium that match is going to be played in, you have to be among those decision makers in order to help influence how the competition is presented, right? And that's definitely a generational shift, right? So I don't think of it in terms of dollars and cents. I mean, there are different sports that represent differently. In my experience with Olympic and Paralympic sport, there are some examples of gender parity, right? Equal prize money. I deal a lot with beach volleyball. That's always been an equal prize money sport. The men make the same as the women. The women actually have more tournaments at times than the men. But then you look at when you're comparing sports that like baseball and softball, right? It's two different sports, right? But yet we associate those individual sports with either men for baseball or women for softball. Well, why is that? Right? And why should softball be compensated any less? Well, what helps balance out the gender pay discussion is more women, more people, more men coming into the workplace and the decision-making roles that take this subject seriously, right? You have to have somebody who's in that decision-making role take this very seriously. If you look at with women's soccer and with the women's soccer team, they drove the discussion, right? The athletes used their voice to drive the discussion. And then other, the men's team came on and other allies stepped forward. A friend of mine who coaches women's athletics, his name is Jeff Porter from California, has been coaching girls and women's volleyball for a number of years. He made a really interesting point, right? That through the lifespan of his career, right, 30 some odd years, that he's actually been able to witness, the women that are being mentored or being lifted into these decision-making roles behind the scenes. And I think that has a big part, right, in establishing, okay, what do we do next, right? How do we move forward from that? You have to open the discussion about equal pay, have to open the discussion about equal conditions, right? It's equal pay and equal services, and whether it's mental health or even the size of the locker room, right? We have to bring those topics into the forefront and start discussing them, but we also have to make sure that we place our allies in the right decision-making roles. And in my opinion, the decision-making is something that's going to help us move forward on equal pay.
No, absolutely. Everything you said is just absolutely spot on. And I would love to hear what Zamaya has to say, because you are part of the future, on what your hopes are for equal pay for women and all that good stuff. So go ahead.
I just want to say I totally agree with everything you just said, Ms. Lori, but I definitely think that being in a sport and seeing it right now, I definitely think it has made some progress. Like I said, women's sports are being shown on TV and being held at bigger arenas and being televised more to kind of make people more aware of women in sports. I do think that there are pushes made, but majority of them are being led by the athletes themselves. But I think there's probably more that can be done by outside sources to invest in athletes as well, because kind of just hearing from people that it's directly affecting isn't enough all the time. Sometimes needs to be outside voices that agree. I do think that the whole stereotype that women's sports aren't entertaining is totally wrong. I think women's sports are probably some of the most interesting. We have passion and we enjoy what we do just as much as the men do. So I think that with more viewership and how many people are tuning into all aspects of women's sports, soccer, swimming, volleyball, basketball, I just think that the more that they're pushed out, the more people that will. But I don't think that it's talked about enough. There aren't any commercials or previews of upcoming games. ESPN does it every now and then, but I think with more push, then we can get more viewership and more people to kind of just be aware of the big things going on in the women's sports world.
A lot of that push will come from and has been coming from the athlete voice, right? The athletes are incredibly important. And whether you're a professional athlete or a recreational athlete, someone who just enjoys, watching the matches, I think the athlete voice has made a significant impact, right? And that's not just the female athlete voice, but also in the men that are playing sports, right? Or the men that are behind the scenes that for years have been allies to women's athletics. Well, now we have women in those same decision-making roles. So that's a great shift in the dynamic. The paradigm is shifting, right? The more we get people into these decision-making roles, and also just plain and simple, something that applies to all of us, value your worth, right? Don't settle for less than what you're worth, right? And that's true whether you are the professional athlete, in front of the screen, or if you are the professional working behind the scenes as well.
No, and going along with that and going along with what you said, Zamaya, I mean, us women are working just as hard as the men, and if not harder, just to get the recognition that we deserve. And I feel like men and the audience are definitely looking at that and definitely are seeing us now and are tuning into more games, and tuning into more basketball games, soccer games, volleyball. I mean, tuning into almost every single sport imaginable, which is a great thing to see now. And very exciting to see for the future, for what the future holds for us as women and as women athletes, for sure. Does anybody else have any comments on this?
So if I could jump in real quick. So one thing Lori kind of mentioned is I don't think our male counterparts realize how much of an impact that they could have on our recognition and giving us a platform. Because, for example, like Hannah and I play in like the female version of the NFL, basically. And if, like, for Pittsburgh, I live in Pittsburgh, play for Pittsburgh. If a Steelers player could post our schedule, that could almost triple who sees our schedule. Because if they already have the platform, and they already have the following, it could really boost our viewership as well. So I think that when, male athletes say they're an ally and they support like equal pay and things like that, I think that we should call upon them and be like, okay, well, use your platform to help us out. And that's really where you can make an impact for us. So I definitely think that bringing our male counterparts in soccer, whatever sport it is, basketball, can definitely help us as well.
No, exactly. And I feel like for the WNBA, I feel like Kobe Bryant did a significant part in help developing like women recognition in the WNBA, and being able to say like women can play too. And I feel like his voice was a really big part in uplifting the WNBA and making it more like making it like kind of what it is right now. So totally agree with what you said. Does anybody else have any comments they would like to say?
Well, the male allies have been there in front and behind the scenes, right? So it's really what it's about is using the tools that are available to us as a community of sports culture, right, to create an opportunity for ourselves that then we can then bring other people along with us, right? And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, again, I'm just a tiny bit older than most of you on on this panel, but I've seen the shift where before it was kind of every woman looking out for herself, right? And now there's more of a collective, kind of a collective movement or collective voice, but that happens with, with allies from all across sports culture, right? So, I had, whether it's a boss that gives you a promotion or a producer that gives you an opportunity on camera or a coach, that lifts up their athlete, or fellow athletes, right? No matter what gender they identify with, fellow athletes, who are talking about each other's sports, right? It doesn't have to be in the same sport. It can be a basketball player that really loves to watch women's football. I thought, this is awesome. Like, have you guys seen this? Right. So that sharing element of it, I think is huge. That's a huge part of it. So what Maria was talking about, like, that's incredibly important, but it has to be a consistent effort, among all the allies in our sports culture.
Yes, totally. I totally agree. Kristen, Hannah, Manisha, do you have anything you would like to say, or should we move on?
I definitely agree with everything that everybody said. So
Absolutely. Okay. I'll go to the next. So our next topic. So do women have the same support services as men's programs? This includes professional, collegiate, national teams / Olympic, and even high school sports. And when I say support services, I'm talking about facilities, equipment, transportation, medical support, mental performance, coaching, team staff, and program staff, etc. Hannah, would you like to talk about your own experience with this or own perspective?
yeah, this is definitely something I'm really passionate about because for the first time since coming to Texas and playing with the Texas Lee Spartans was the first time I ever felt like I truly had a support system being an athlete. I'm super grateful for what they've given us because unfortunately as a female playing sports, you usually don't get that. I used to play on a dirt field, no lines, whatever helmet they gave you, you had to pay out of pocket for everything. It's just the standard was so low. And now coming onto a team where, we get a swag bag. I've never gotten free stuff before, top of the line helmets, the facility we train at. We have a mental health coach, like all those services that should be standard for women, but we just don't get that. So I'm grateful, but it's also a lot of work that our organization puts into it. A lot is, women supporting women, making sure that's the standard, trying to elevate our program and our organization. So it really does take a lot of work, and unfortunately, sometimes we don't get that. For example, when I went to Worlds in Finland, I paid out of pocket for that, and it was a really disappointing experience, just the standard that was held for us. So to see the two different extremes, it really, really makes you want to stick to that standard. And I wish all women could experience that when they play.
No, I'm really, really glad that you shared your perspective on that. And yeah, that was great. Thank you. Manisha, would you like to say anything, or Kristen, your perspectives on that?
Sure, yeah. So kind of from like a psychology point of view, I think it's so important to understand the needs and development of women and girls in sports, because an example often used is menstruation. How much education do girls even have about that, or when is it kind of, when are they irregular, when do they need to go see a doctor? So I think it's so important to understand the developmental needs of women and girls in sports. And I also think it's really important to have this level of intersectionality in there as well. So what does it mean to be a woman with a certain faith, for example? So, are they wearing a hijab? Are sports allowing that? How are they catering towards that, and how much support is there behind them? And again, another example could be, again, facilities. Is there a prayer room? Is that in place? And it's kind of thinking of, again, that intersectionality of what it means to be a woman in different contexts, and then bringing that into sports. And I think a lot can be done, and it's not to say that it's only women that can do this, men can do this as well. And it's having men being open to learning about this and learning how they can support women. Because I know I've had a friend who wanted to do sort of a workshop on how periods can affect performance, and they were all up for it. They were like, yeah, but then when it came to delivering it, they were sort of like, nah. And it's like, well, it's all about putting actions to what you're saying, essentially. And I think it's so important to, again, go back to this point of having men as allies, and looking at, the support's there, but what about the quality of support, and how much are these athletes being listened to? So I just wanted to raise that point, because I think it's so important, because there's no one size fits all approach.
Gosh, Manisha, that point is so relevant right now, because we think, we're all in the United States right now, but I know we had a couple of our professional athletes on this panel who mentioned that they played overseas, right? If you can imagine, when you talk, since we're talking about culture and women's sports, there are still countries where women are not allowed to participate on their national team, or to travel. If they are chosen for their national team, their passports are being held by either their oldest male relative or their spouse, right? And they are not allowed to travel without that person's permission, right? Or, there are cultures where women can't physically interact with men. I just attended a parasport world championship, right, in sitting volleyball, and there were officials that came from one country that are not allowed to even shake the hand, or even a formality, shaking the referee's hand, or such, if it's male-female contact, right? So when we talk about the services that are available, they don't have to necessarily be equal, the equal service, they have to be accessible equally, right? Because the women's team might need something slightly different than a men's team, right? Just as it is, but the access to that service, whatever it is, should be provided equally and appropriately, right? But yeah, there's still countries where all of us on this panel wouldn't even be allowed to step into an arena and watch a men's or women's sport competition. And this is what, February of 2023, right? That's incredible still, but that's such a great point, Manisha.
I've been fortunate enough as an amateur athlete, not being compared to like women's football to men's football or soccer or whatever. I found our resources are fairly similar, and often because our women's team performs at a higher level than our men's team, you actually often receive more resources. But on the same note that you brought up, Lori, in somewhere like Switzerland, which you think is a very progressive country, the women we're not allowed in the same change rooms as the men. And if there's female PTs, they aren't allowed to enter the men's change room. They have to go to a common area. And it blew my mind going there the first time. I was like, this is still happening. This is a very progressive country. It's really interesting when I'm also exposed to like Russian or Romanian athletes and stuff like that. And they have very interesting ways that they treat women on their team, and often like terrifying things like used as like bargaining chips and stuff like that for different equipment, and things that I've heard are like mortifying from some countries, the way that they treat their women.
And that point comes up a lot, sorry, with safeguarding of athletes, right? So that's one area that I am working in. And you look at the Haitian women's football team, right? So the Court of Arbitration of Sport just overturned a lifetime ban for a gentleman who was, accused and found, to be accountable for all kinds of misconduct, against these athletes, right? And these are young, impressionable athletes, in a country where being on your sports team, right? Every other country in the world except ours, subsidizes their national athletics, right? And so making it to that level is a gift, right? It's seen as a very big privilege. And in terms of what services are available to you, you might have more life skill services available to you as an athlete. You may have housing available to you. You may have, medical services, things that we take sort of for granted as being basic. But yet, from a safeguarding perspective, who's protecting these athletes, right, from the type of really it's abuse that Kristen just talked about, like the bargaining, the sort of harsher hand, right, that could be used with a coach-player dynamic. So it's all part of the same conversation. Like how many programs could use some help with safe sport or protective services or something of that nature, right? And is it equal between men's sports and women's sports? I would love to know. I happen to feel it's not, right? I feel like there are more jeopardizing situations for female athletes, especially in the international marketplace. I've seen verbal abuse, female athletes that's from one country, and then the men's counterparts, it's like, oh, everyone's patting them on the back and, oh, great job. Yet maybe the women's team won their match and the men's team didn't, right? You see all sorts of, things, but that is, I think it's access to services, right? Identifying what can help the team, period, right? And then making that available, whether it's a men's football team or a women's tennis team or, whatever the case may be. The access is what's important, I think.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think we've been kind of talking about how we need more women in media and representation there, but there's also like if we had more female coaches and more female staff on the ground, that would be a big thing too, because I know maybe I would like to think most women would stand up for other women in bad scenarios and try and move things forward and protect their athletes.
And
that point that Kristen just made about women standing up for other women, that should be like a banner across everybody's screen right now, because that is so important. But to be honest with you, in my salty lifetime, I've not seen enough of that, right? I've not seen enough of women's administrators, female administrators, standing up for their female athletes, or female officials like myself, being able to be in a position to affect more positive change. It's still a struggle, right? The honest truth is it's still very much of a struggle. So I think that Kristen, you touched on, like, that should be like our mantra, that women have to stand up for other women, because I don't see it enough,
Yeah.
in all the different areas of sport.
I think it can be crazy because I've seen some women come into female coaching roles and it's almost like they feel this pressure they've won a few female coaching roles. So it's like this pressure to hold on to it and therefore conform with maybe the ideals of the men's coaching program or the men's coaches or whatever. And it's almost like this person you thought was going to be an ally just ends up contributing to the problems.
And I know for me, one thing that has stuck with me for years is reverting back to the facilities, is when I believe it was 2020 when the NCAA had this big facility, like weight room for the men's, like all college men's teams, and they had like this big facility room for them, and it was like nice, and it was like everything was just so super nice. And then you went to the women's, the NCAA, and they had, I think, a few yoga mats and like a few little dumbbells, and like that was it. And also their gear, like the men got like these like flashy, so like flamboyant, like Nike gear, and like everything matched, everything was this and that. But then for the women's, they got like a pink Nike shirt with like random black gray shorts or something like that. And it like when that came out, like it was like shown, like it was set in stone that the NCAA did not value women's sports. Like they made it known right there, like this, like we don't care about women's sports, and like we're not going to value them, we value the men. And this, like, so many women had to come on and post about it. And I mean, even men, even I believe, I want to say Steph Curry even posted about it as well, which is good because like men are noticing this as well, and saying and making a statement like this is wrong. But it, like, the NCAA should have never done that in the first place. They should get it right the first time. And that has really stuck with me. And I've even written about this because it was just like, it just didn't make sense. Like you're making it known that you do not value women's sports. And that just like did not make sense at all. But yeah, that really stuck with me for a while. So,
well, it kind of all goes back to who's making the decisions behind the scenes, right? So we're talking about like, what are you providing, to your athletes? And so just I mean, a little bit kind of on or off topic, but there's an organization, the Foundation for Global Sports Development. They just launched this past year an athlete helpline, right? So it's not a crisis center, like it's a help, it's exactly what it says it is, athletehelpline.org, right? And athletes can access resources, they can call just if they need to talk to somebody. It's 24 hours. But things like this, what effect did seeing what the men got versus what the women got for the final, for the championship, what effect did that have on the mentality of the athletes that were getting ready to perform? Because you remember, it was Sedona Praise who got the video that the trainer had captured, and you're like, well, hold on a second, like we have one set of dumbbells, but they've got like a whole convention center laid out, with Olympic level strength and conditioning equipment. But these opportunities, like I was just reading in the news, I saw in our chat, that there's a situation, what we allow will continue, right? That's a phrase I've used before. And you look at these cases of, especially with women's athletics, like a female coach, who verbally abusing her athletes, for Cal swimming, right? Terry McKeever. Or you look at that situation and you think of, okay, what effect or impact, does that have on the athletes who didn't say something about it, or didn't have a service or mental health, outlet, or even just a social outlet, right? That they could take that kind of like, impact and get rid of it, right? Get it off your chest, right? But things like, what is the impact of these, whether it's perception of, NCAA valuing men's basketball over women's basketball, we don't know what again, decision makers, right? Who were the decision makers behind the scene? And clearly they weren't talking to each other, when they made those selections on swag. But more importantly, advancing the conversation, where do you go, right, to get that as an athlete? I mean, all these professional athletes and recreational athletes that we have on this call, it's like, where could you have gone? I know when I was, young and growing up and playing sports, there weren't any places. You were just told, you have to deal with it. You have to suck it up. You have to, that's just how girls are treated in, on the team. Or if you're the only girl playing Little League baseball, right? Because you don't want to play Bobby Sox softball. You'd rather play Little League, baseball. So what are the services, right, that we could be providing to all athletes? But more importantly, what have women had to sort of stay silent about, right, all these years that we could? I mean, I'm looking at Zavia and your generation, right? So much more empowerment, right, that's coming at your level, and your voice, while equally important as any other women's athlete, throughout the years, but your voice as your generation is crisp, it's clear, right? It's powerful, right? And that, that comes with the evolution of how we discuss issues like this, and where can you go, right? Was there an athlete helpline when I was a kid? Absolutely not. There's an athlete helpline now, and it's helping quite a number of people bring issues to the forefront for discussions just like this, right? And find assistance, support.
I totally agree, Lori. I think that since social media has been such a big thing, I feel like that's an immediate outlet. Like you were saying, Riley, about the NCAA thing. The first thing they did was go to Instagram about it, because when you have such a large following and people are actually following women's athletes and following women's sports, that it went viral so quickly that everybody knew about it. That was all I was seeing on my timeline for pretty much the whole time they were there. So I definitely think that social media is such a large place where most things about women's sports are not being ignored, especially when it's placed on such large platforms like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I think that it's more noticed then, rather than just voicing your opinion any other way. I think that social media is just such a way where it's like unfiltered. And I think that so many people were, like you said, tweeting about it and reposting it. And men's athletes, famous men's athletes, professional sports, everyone was talking about it. So it kind of made it like you couldn't ignore it to that extent because of how much it was spoken about and how no one kept quiet about it.
I definitely love this topic because I do remember when that blew up on Twitter, and it was so disappointing to see, because when you talk about like not valuing female athletes, but then also, the poor nutrition, or, well, women don't really work out, so they don't really need a weight room, and just like perception of female athletes still was super frustrating. But I think it was great that she did speak up, because I do recall, I don't even think it was a full 24 hours before they had all of a sudden got the weight room, got everything. So it was like the money's there. They have the resources. They chose not to do that because that was the standard. They don't, you know what I mean? But for us athletes speaking up and continue to speak up, it changes that. And I think that's going to bring us forward, because that holds the standard and will change things.
And I think just to follow, I know we've gone so over with this topic, but I think a lot of, well, any psychologist like listening, like we always refer back to this psychological safety. And again, this links to culture and being able to speak up about any issues that are going on, and making sure that they've got someone, again, within the staff that they can go to, and something can actually be done about it, as opposed to just being a tick box exercise. Because is anything going to be done? We don't know. And it's a case of, again, actions speak louder than words. But I think, again, bringing awareness and speaking up, that's the first thing. But before that, it's actually, what's the culture, and is it psychologically safe for them to feel like they can speak up and not feel like it's just going to be kind of rubbed off, like it's something that's taken seriously, because then then they might not then speak up again in the future because it's not important. So I think, yeah, that's something that's, yeah, really important. And again, it comes back to this access as well. So in my job, I also work as a learning support advisor at a university, so any students with additional needs and disabilities. And again, it's making sure that the students that I'm working with can tell me if their lecturers aren't printing worksheets on different coloured paper, or if they're not giving lecture slides in advance. And again, it comes with that building those relationships and thinking, okay, if you're not happy, just let me know, and then I will then do something about it. So
So I also think that a lot of female athletes carry a very heavy burden, a lot of heavy burdens that people don't realize, because it's kind of like a cause and effect thing. We don't make as much money as the men. So in turn, a lot of us have full-time jobs during season and off season. I can say all my teammates have full-time jobs. They're entrepreneurs, and then they also are moms. So they have a lot of stuff to worry about at home while also trying to be professional, semi-professional athletes. And that's a lot. So it can I feel like it definitely has a mental effect on female athletes that kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit. So people don't really realize how much we have going on outside of our sport as well, because it's things that we have to do to take care of ourselves, or for some athletes, their family as well.
No, and going along with what you said, Hannah, earlier about the NCAA, they had the money to give the women the equipment, and they really just decided not to, which is still so crazy, and is just like, it seemed like they just wanted to degrade the women's basketball, and like that is just crazy to me. But I do have a question for you, Zamia, as a young up and coming female athlete. How did you feel about the disparity at the NCAA tournament? Yes, that's my question.
I definitely think it kind of showed a bigger issue, like you all were saying, and how blatant it is, but it's kind of hard to see when there's nothing to compare it to, because the men aren't just posting their weight rooms and the meals they get and kind of just showing that. So I think that them being, in similar facilities and kind of having something to compare it to made it more obvious and kind of showed everyone like this is the reality of it. So whether we speak up about it or anyone posts about it or anything like that, it is happening, and it was happening right in front of our faces. So I definitely think it did kind of show me the reality of it and kind of feel like this is how it is, even at like such a professional level. That's pretty much the the highest professional level compared to people getting paid to play their sport. So it definitely showed me the window of like how it truly looks. But I think that the support shown after seeing how big of an issue it was also showed like people aren't okay with it, and people are striving to make a change and they don't want this to be the reality of it. So it was nice to see how much of a movement it made after that.
It's like social media was this huge spotlight, right? This like transparency window for exposing the side-by-side comparison. But look what happened in the aftermath, and something that Maria touched on as far as like the burden on athletes, and the burden especially on female athletes, right? With all the different things that people are juggling, whether it's a full-time job or family life or entrepreneurial interests or such. Look what happened after that side-by-side comparison, right? Of these, this really kind of like underperforming, services for the women, and these kind of over extravagant, overperforming services for the men. All these companies started going onto their Twitter or started going to their social media like, well, hey, we can, what was it, Academy Sports, which was the rival to Dick's Sports, which is the NCAA sponsor, right? Oh, hey, we can have a full weight room setup out to the women's, the women's hotel right by this afternoon. So now you're showing the sort of like healthy competition, right? And the attraction that women's athletics has. It kind of goes back to all the questions that we've addressed so far in this discussion, is that there is an appetite, right, for women's athletics out there. There are people making decisions now behind the scenes, whether no matter what gender they are, there are people behind the scenes making smarter decisions and taking advantage of opportunities. Yes, it would be better if we could have planned ahead to have better and equal services for everybody. But the fact that there was such a emotional but also practical reaction, right? Food companies saying, hey, we'd be happy to cater, we will have our food truck out there to the hotel, or we'd be happy to send, meals or whatever. I mean, the reaction to it, if we're trying to look for something positive, right, that comes out of all of this, is that, and again, that was pre-NIL. Remember, that was before name, image, and likeness was actually allowed. So now you're seeing this whole landscape, right, of potential sponsors, potential supporters, potential, donors being exposed because of this inequality, that was shown, right? So as far as how do you turn this really terrible situation, right, really unfair, just inappropriate situation, how do you turn that around? Okay, well, you look for those like shining lights of positive, positive reaction. Okay, great. Whatever company that was that said they could get the equipment out there, go to them for next year's finals. Or if your school is participating, in the women's championship, maybe that's an opportunity, right, to get involved. The number of corporations that are interested in whether it's a branding opportunity or just a philanthropic opportunity or straight up corporate profit making opportunity, the number of corporations that are interested in women's sports far outweigh those that are not, right? So I think this is an opportunity. This moment becomes an opportunity. Like, great, let's put it out there, before next year's final or before, something else happens. So there is a little bit of a light, at the end of this long tunnel, right, that we're walking down together. But it encompasses everything. We have to give the resources, we have to give the services, we have to elevate people into decision-making positions, and then we have to talk about it like we are right now, right?
No, there definitely is a light at the end of the tunnel, which we can all definitely see. But I do want to ask Hannah and Maria how they saw the disparity at the tournament, and what do you guys really encounter every day in your sport?
Maria, do you want to
Okay.
go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I did see when that was all over Twitter, and I think that, I'm a strength coach for college athletes, for male and female. So I am living it every day myself, but I also see it in my athletes. And, one of the girls came up to me and said something that, like, I'll never forget this. And she was asking me about, my sport and the things that we get or don't get. And she was like, oh, so it never ends, because she's a college female athlete dealing with this stuff. And she saw that I was still dealing with it at a professional level. And when she said that, it just broke my heart, because I want to be able to tell her, like, no, like, it's going to get better and things like that. But to know that she saw that and was like disappointed, like, oh, it doesn't change, things aren't getting better. But I want the female athletes to know at like a younger level, especially, that we are pushing for them. And, every day I wake up and I train these female athletes, and I give them the same opportunities that the men have, because I didn't have that at the college level and at the high school level. So I really try to give that to them. But also, like, in our own sport, I think that things are definitely getting better. But like you guys said, we have to keep talking about these things, and we have to speak up on them. Like, talking about basketball, I don't know if you guys know Angel Reese. I love her. And Zamaya's shaking her head. Like, I love her because she is so authentic and she speaks out. And even when people are pushing her, to calm down or not be so vocal, she gets louder. And I think that female athletes need to understand that it's okay for us to do that, because that's how things are going to change. So for me, I'm refusing to tone down, like, I'm going to speak up on these things. And I hope that other women do as well, without fear of repercussions of how it's going to make us look or how people are going to talk about us. So
I just want to say, Maria, I think that you're the type of person that we need as a coach. I think it's great that your priority is keeping both the men and women's program the same, and like, you don't really, like, there's no reason that training or facilities or whatever need to be any different. And so you're exactly what we need more of in the sporting system, is women who are fostering that from the ground up kind of thing.
I think, to piggyback off what both you guys said from like a training aspect, so Where I work now, I originally started just working out here, and I'm with the NFL off-season program. So I'm the only girl in the program. And when I first started, everybody was like, "What are you doing here?" And they were kind of confused. But then once they figured out I played football, kind of heard my story, and then day in, day out training with them, they started to have that level of respect because, yeah, they are stronger than me, but I'm doing every exercise, every movement, everything that they're doing. So I think it is important I understand having separate, men, women training separately, but also when it's possible to do that collab because you see what women are capable of and kind of gets rid of that stereotype that, oh, women can't do this, or, the standards down here because we can't do push-ups, we can't do this, right? Like that needs to stop and people need to see what we're really capable of.
I actually I do a co-ed sport, bobsleighs, men and women. We always train together, we go on tour together, and my training groups are both men and women. And oftentimes, as a more veteran athlete, or other female athletes who are more veteran are used as the example for new men athletes or whatever. And I think it is really important to have those co-ed atmospheres because my program is no different than a men's athlete. And I don't think any of the men who I train with and who train with other women honestly see the female capabilities as any different.
Well, we will definitely have more webinars, as we definitely do have more topics to discuss about. But this webinar was very fruitful and very focused. And definitely looking forward to a part 2, maybe part 3. But I would definitely like to thank each and every one of you for your incredible thoughts and contributions to the Coaches Roundtable. It was a pleasure meeting all of you and discussing all of these topics with you and making it well known within the culture in sports. And I would like to thank you guys for your desire to better leadership and culture within the organization. And our next Culture Roundtable is on March 22nd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, which is called Mistakes Coaches Make. If you would like to learn more about culture in sports, our different programs, or our webinar series, Culture Roundtable, please visit us at cultureinsports.com. And thank you again to everybody who came and discussed.